It is October 31st, 2025. It is 3:49 p.m. as we record this. Heart of Midlothian are 6 points clear at the top of the Scottish Premiership. Hello and welcome to the latest from the Terrace Scottish Football Podcast. I promise that's the last time I'm going to be a dick about Hearts being table-topping title challengers. My name is Joel Sked, and to help me recap this midweek action in the Scottish Premiership, I am joined by a man who also follows table-topping Heart of Midlothian. I promise I'll stop. Craig Fowler. How's it going?
Hello, Joe. How's it going?
Yeah, very well, as you can tell by the sound of or the tone of my voice.
Yes, it's still good. It's a slight slip up, but still undefeated, still 6 points clear. A real shame that we weren't available for after the 3-1 victory over Celtic and had to hand that over to Gary and Craig. But we're here now to still bask. People were saying, like, you see some people on Twitter saying, like, oh, that's the bubble burst.
Yeah,
I think a 2-2 draw away at St Mirren is not a bad result in the grand scheme of things.
I got so many Celtic fans just tweeting me about saying, oh, that's a bubble burst, or etc. etc. I was like, does that count as bubble bursting, coming from behind twice at St Mirren and nearly winning it? I don't know, but there we are. That's one of the games we are going.
Yeah, but sorry, I was going to say, when we lose to or draw with Dundee tomorrow, that'll be the bubble bursting.
Yes, feel free to abuse me of that and say how bad Hearts are and going to be for the rest of the season. But leave until something meaningful. Where are we going first? Have you got an ad to do first, or do you want to get straight into the action?
I suppose we should kick off the ad first of all. NordVPN, Joel. We've talked about a lot on the podcast recently, and there's a reason for that, is that Nord keep coming back to us and say, can you keep doing more adverts? Because our listeners are very sensible, and they're listening to the things we're telling them. All the good things about NordVPN, how they can help you get around restrictions on certain programs, for instance, that we're maybe quite close to in certain countries. And it can also help you access, different movies and TV shows from abroad that you might otherwise not be able to do. Or when you go on holiday and you can't see it, you can access it through that. All you have to do, fire up NordVPN, pick a VPN, an IP address from another country, and then you've got access. It can help you get discounts. I remember I've not had a look this season, but I will do actually quite soon. There was a couple of seasons ago where I got an NBA season package where you get like all the games live, all the highlights, and that was only like £25 because I had NordVPN, so I was able to fire it up and ping it over to India. And in India, you got it all for like £25 as opposed to like the £150 it costs in the UK.
Oh, okay.
We've talked about how good it is in terms of cybersecurity, and as I've said on the podcast, we had our former Twitter account hacked into. Rob has his one hacked into, and both of them are now gone forever, and we've had to start up new ones. That wouldn't have happened had we been smart enough. If I'd had NordVPN running, that wouldn't have happened. But I had it dormant at the time, and that was my mistake. But I will learn from that. And yeah, also if you want to get around certain government restrictions or websites, then it's a good for that as well.
I'm going on holiday during the international break, so I will be hopefully using it to watch the Scotland games when away. And I was actually going to ask you about whether it would have helped a certain politician out, but we won't go down that. We won't go down that route. We won't go down that route.
Oh, I think it might have done. I actually think it might have done if we'd. Yeah, we won't say anymore. Maybe breaching some data protection if we go any further than that. But if you're interested in signing up to NordVPN, you can do so with a free 30-day money-back guarantee by going to nordvpn.com/terracepod. Once more, that's nordvpn.com/terracepod for a free 30-day money-back guarantee. And hopefully I don't forget, and I put the link to that in the description of this podcast.
I will remind you. Right, let's get into the action, and we will start in Paisley, St Mirren 2, Hearts 2, and we may as well get the big moment, the controversial moment out of the way first, because I think you've maybe spent the last 48 hours, probably 90% of those 48 hours, looking at set pieces from St Mirren on Wyscout.
Yes, I have. So that was what I wrote about in my article for the Herald today. It's a deliberate tactic from St Mirren this season. Now, yes, obviously, blocking takes place at just about every single set piece. It's kind of baked into how teams set up their set pieces. But what St Mirren have done this season is intentionally had players running offside before the ball is kicked. And not just one, not usually just one player, usually multiple players doing it. There was at least 3 or 4, maybe even 5 instances or so. The kind of favourite one seems to be 3 separate players. And you can tell it's deliberate because they're not just kind of going early. They're actually moving parallel to the defensive line but behind it. And then when the free kick's taken, usually what they'll do is they'll flight it above those players for somebody kind of running in at the back. And it's basically somebody running in from deep. And what their hope is that these guys who are offside either act as a decoy or they act as blockers, which help them then free up somebody for a free run at goal. So I done that off the back of what happened on Wednesday evening with St Mirren, who looked like they were going to go 3-1 ahead with Miguel Freckleton scoring what seemed to be his second of the game, but it was called back for a VAR decision. I didn't see it till Wednesday morning. I was down the other end and I was quite low, so I had no idea what was given. I thought it was just a straightforward offside. But then, obviously the referee was called over to the monitor, so I thought, well, okay, it must be for somebody interfering with play. And then I saw everybody was going, before I saw everybody was going rage about it, and then I watched it and I was like, I don't think it's necessarily the wrong decision. So I think it's still a bit of a nonsense, and I'll get to that in a second. But there's a lot of people I seem to think don't seem to understand what it has actually been given for, because a lot of people are talking about there's barely any contact whatsoever. It's not a foul. Well, yeah, it's not a foul. That's not what it's given for. It's not given for a foul. It's not even necessarily given for contact, although I think the fact that O'Hara does make contact with Shankland does play a part in the decision. It's given because O'Hara is offside. And when he's offside, he has to be, to not be deemed offside, he has to be not interfering with play. Now, I think the nonsense is that there is enough of a doubt, there's a serious doubt actually, that plays any part at all in Freckleton putting the ball in the back of the net. Yeah. I've looked at it a few times. Shankland is the closest defender to him, so I can see why. But I think there's still enough doubt that, and it's the thing I come back to over and over again with VAR in this country. This clear and obvious error. Sorry, error? Clear and obvious error. Clear and obvious error that has to be made by the on-field officials for VAR to get involved. They do it all the time. It never seems to... They really seem to take that into account. It's just if the referee or the assistant referees, the video assistant referees in the box, wherever they are looking at it and they think, oh no, I actually think this should be given instead. Then they recommend it and then they get into the head of the referee. They don't have that kind of barometer that you see in international football, you see in English football, where it doesn't get involved as much. And VAR isn't something that we talk about every single bloody week, because that's the problem in Scottish football. But at the same time, it's not an outrageous decision as a lot of people say, and I think it's a poor use of VAR, and I think the goal should have been allowed to stand. But it's kind of apples and oranges, but it's similar to when somebody's standing in front of the goalkeeper. Yeah. And it's in the goalkeeper sight line and they're in offside position. They're not touching the goalkeeper. They're not touching necessarily anybody. They're not doing it, and they might even just be standing there, but they are still interfering with play because of where they are. Now and another reason why you can say VAR shouldn't have got involved is because it wasn't like Shankland had to make the biggest movement around O'Hara, but it still probably cost them a couple of steps. So like I say, I can see why it's given. I don't think it should have done, but people have to realise that it's not given for a foul. It's not given for contact. It's given for interfering with play. Even if O'Hara and Shankland had not made contact at all, under the rules, they still could have claimed that he was blocking Shankland's path. Shankland had to divert his run to go around him, and then therefore he is offside and interfere with play. That's what it's given for.
I found it really interesting. So I was in the St Mirren main stand in the press pit, and the monitor, the VAR monitor, is just basically straight down on the side of the pitch from there. And before McDermott got called over, he'd obviously got it in his ear what they were kind of looking at, because he spoke separately to Shankland and O'Hara in the centre circle. Explained what they were looking at, and then he came across, looked at the monitor, and usually when they look at the monitor, come back onto the pitch, they'll do the VAR sign, and then they'll gesture or indicate their decision. He didn't. He spoke to both O'Hara and Shanklin first and explained it, and you could see that Shanklin was nodding his head when he was explaining it, and then he said, "Yeah," because that's where when he said people were saying that it was given for a foul. It wasn't, because he gestured offside after he'd spoken to both of them, and then Miguel Freckleton, he spoke to the media afterwards, and he said that the referee called it subjective. I think it was a subjective offside. I think it was the reason that Freckleton was given. Like you, the more you kind of more understand it, you go, right, I kind of understand why it's given. If it was like reverse, I'd be like, what the hell? That's a nonsense decision.
Do you know what's quite interesting as well? Because the angle when they're presumably drawing the lines, and then they're checking to see where O'Hara interfered with Shanklin. I wonder, now maybe to be fair, there is two of them, so maybe they're looking at different angles at the same time, and when I'm saying, oh, that's maybe a bit of a bump there and Shanklin's had to run around them, let's see if O'Hara's offside. Maybe that is what happened. But it really surprised me that they caught it. And I have seen some fans saying, I think this is fair enough, saying like, it's quite pernickety. Like, it's kind of thing like, it's really struggle for consistency because nonsense goes on in penalty areas all the time, and you don't usually get this kind of forensic detail on it. Because St Mirren have done it so many times this season, so I went on Y-Scout, and this is where the basis of the article came from. There was 30 clips on Y-Scout of St Mirren with attacking free kicks that were crosses into the penalty area, so not direct free kicks. And of those 30, and I mean, some of them were literally like the goalkeeper knocking it long from his own half, so they're not going to do it there. And there was also a couple where you couldn't tell because the camera zoomed in on the free kick taker. But so let's say out of like 26 or 27, there was 14 instances where St Mirren, I think, was quite obviously were trying this tactic of having guys standing offside and then them being blockers. They got away with it big time at Easter Road. So I remember at the time, I missed it as well. I was looking at Gogic, because remember that goal when Freckleton scored at Easter Road and Gogic ran over the kind of sight line of the ball. And I think the debate there was whether he was interfering with play. But in that same moment, Ayunga's also offside, and he kind of runs in to Iredale, who's the closest man to Freckleton. I don't even know whether the officials saw that at the time, but that was certainly a much clearer case than what we saw at what we saw on Wednesday night against Hearts. And they've done it a couple of times in the game against Dundee. They've done it in pretty much at least once in every single match. And I can't help but wonder if somebody's made the SFA aware of it, or like a kind of sly complaint has been put in. So then they were actually kind of looking for it, and that's how they caught it on Wednesday. But like I say, at the same time, I think St Mirren were still a bit unlucky. I think it's crafty, I think it's gamesmanship, and I think that's fair enough. It's quite cunning, and they're still unlucky not to have got away with that.
I know, I remember seeing it. I remember that, I think it was Monday Night Football. This is going back a few years, so I've not watched Monday Night Football in years. But they highlighted a team in the English Premier League. I think it was Carragher and Neville, and the way they did it, and the like kind of the blocking aspect coming offside. I always thought it was quite a good manoeuvre. But then, obviously, like you said, maybe someone's highlighted it. If you were to listen to Chris Finn, I'm sure he would say that it was James Anderson who's highlighted it to the referees and to help the establishment club that is Heart of Midlothian Football Club. Moving on.
I hope he's right.
So, same.
So all these people saying, the conspiracy to help the other establishment club win the title. Good. Hope it continues all the way to May.
Well, if that's the case, then they weren't doing a very good job when they gave St Mirren a free kick for the opening goal. I
actually thought that was a free kick. I thought Shanklin pinned his arm.
I mean, it looked to me like Fraser was very smart about it, but it's one of those.
Maybe sold a bit, but Shanklin just kind of pinned his arm underneath between his arm and his body. So I think Shanklin was maybe a bit naive.
Yeah, I was being facetious. I was like, one of those was like that's given a foul all the time. So. Moving on to the game itself, we'll stick with Hearts and just get Hearts out of the way. Folk are just stop talking about them. So, positives and negatives for Hearts title challenge, Fowler.
So, I'll start with the negatives. So, the negatives are, if you're looking to follow up a victory over Celtic, and that was really what kind of changed a lot of people's opinions, not just Hearts beating Celtic, but the comfort in which Hearts played in the second half, and only really about the last... there was about a 15, 20-minute period in the first half where you thought, this is maybe not going to work out. But other than that, Hearts were quite clearly the better team. And yes, Celtic were missing players, but then I mean, Celtic missing 5 players should still put out a really good team, and it's not Hearts' fault that they end up looking quite shallow in terms of squad depth whenever some key guys are out. But that was kind of not only 8 points clear, but looking like, oh wow, like Hearts have played really well at Ibrox, played really well against Celtic. You know, you're starting to think, is this just the best team in the league? And you're hoping that it can build enough momentum to then you get to January and then have Celtic and Rangers, or mainly Celtic, spend lots of money and reinforce their squad. Maybe there's enough of that gap that you can see yourselves over the line. And you're hoping it's a campaign where, because I don't think this Hearts team necessarily, after the game against Celtic, I don't think it was necessarily a team that was going to finish on 90 points or whatever. But I thought, oh, this could maybe be like the Aberdeen team under McInnes that finished second. Well, they finished second a few years in a row, but there was a couple where they finished ahead of Rangers and they had like 78 points around about there. So if we get to that and Celtic and Rangers are both kind of around about low 70s, then that could be enough to do it, which is what everybody, I feel like a lot of people don't talk about when they talk about Leicester City's success. It wasn't just Leicester City, it was also the fact everybody else had a dreadful season that year at the top of the English Premier League. So there was a bit of belief, but if you follow that up, you can't really play like Hearts did. First half wasn't great, but they were threatening whenever they got into the final third. First, 25 minutes of the second half? They were just quite poor. And it's the kind of performance that you won't get from Celtic. You'd be even surprised if you got that sustained like crapness from Rangers, you know what I mean? So there was that side of it, but I was like, not sure about this. I'm kind of less, even though they emerged with a decent result, I'm less confident now than I was the other day, and not just because of like results. If Hearts had lost but played a lot better, I might have been more confident in saying, well, that's a blip. They weren't going to win every single game, but there's still enough in this team. I was just a bit concerned by that. However, if you want to get to the positives, they played very well the last 15 minutes. Now, yeah, the psychology of the game is probably a big reason for that, in terms of Hearts are really going for it to try and keep up this momentum. St Mirren are aware of that. They've not had some great results recently. They maybe go into their subconsciously kind of retreat a wee bit. However, I do think what was a big factor was Landry Kabori and Thomas Magnusson coming off the bench. I thought both of them were really good, made big impacts, and you've not really seen anything other than the goalkeeper, apart from Kizaridis and Braga. But I was kind of fine with that to start with, because I thought, right, it's a long-term plan. And with this long-term plan, Braga and Kizaridis being great is perfect, because, I mean, especially Kizaridis, like you would not be surprised at all if Hearts sold him next summer for like, or even January for like over £5 million. Like the guy just looks like a star. And Braga, another bit of cash coming in for him as well, maybe about, I know it's early days, but you could say maybe about 3-4 himself. And there'd be fans of other teams going like, oh, that's ridiculous. And there'd be Hearts fans saying, oh, that's ridiculous. They're worth at least 10. But you know what I mean? Like, regardless of what figures you put on it, it would be enough, a significant profit on the outlay that Hearts have spent already with Tony Bloom's 10 million for whatever chunk they've done of that. And then that's the plan, is then to reinvest that and to keep going. So to have those just 2 players for the first season, that's a plan very much ahead of schedule. However, you then start to see like Ajeau's now back from injury, see what he could do. He looked very impressive against St Mirren, less so against Celtic, but it wasn't the best game to throw him into, and we've not really seen him play much in his actual position of centre midfield. Probably need us to switch to a 4-3-3 for that. But then, if you're going to get guys like Kurjota, who had the cross in the derby, hasn't been seen since, but obviously still getting time to fit into the team, fit into what McInnes wants, do what his manager wants, and you're getting Kabori now and Magnusson. I mean, Magnusson's looked good in quite a few games recently off the bench, and Kabori, if he can replicate that kind of performance in any sort of consistency, then you're looking at not just 2 of the summer signings, 3 plus a goalkeeper, but a huge chunk of these summer signings. And if they do, and it's still early for these guys, like most of them hadn't played in Scottish football before. If these guys could settle and get better as the season goes on, then this Hearts team will get better. And then you might not see many performances like that second half against St Mirren.
I mean, I agree with the view on the players. I just think always there was like, so what was it, a 25-minute spell away to St Mirren? I think that's quite like natural. My fear, off and on, the worry would be if that was a consistent thing, whereas like if it was like Kilmarnock, there's like 25-minute spell, completely fell out of it. 25-minute, and then you get to Dundee with at home. Dundee with a strike. Like, they have these consistent moments where there's those blocks, chunks of games where it's struggling. But it was frustrating against St Mirren, but wasn't overly didn't read too much into that beyond just falling out of the game.
I think what I'm saying there is that you then have to rely on fine margins, which Hearts have had to do so far this season to be in the position they're in. Yeah,
there's been very few controlled, complete performances. The way they'll fund it.
Three very late goals as well. And that's without that, and fans can say like, but that shows the heart in the team and the fight, and they never stop going, blah blah blah. And yeah, there's obviously a certain truth to that. But if you're scoring 3 last-minute goals in your first 10 games of the season, and I'm talking literally injury time goals in your first 10 games of the season, there is always going to be an element of luck with that.
Yeah, it's not just it's you can look at like two ways. Obviously, it's not sustainable. Like, you look at Rafe Rovers when they were scoring all those late goals during their championship season. But at the same time, I think it does show you a good character side of the team, and I think that's where there's a trust building amongst the fans that like this team will go at the end. They'll at least try and, whether at home, I think at home at Aberdeen, McInnes made positive subs when it kind of fell out of it a bit against Hibs when it was a draw, made positive subs to try and win it, and then again made positive subs, had to make positive subs at St Mirren to try and get it back. And it was one of those where if you played another 5 minutes, I felt like Hearts probably would have found a way to win it. But you are wanting to maybe have that more consistent, where it was like Celtic or Falkirk, where there's a bit more for control and less tension in your performance.
Yeah. So I spoke for ages there. Tell me about St Mirren's performance, because you would have had a better view of that because you were in the centre of the park and not, I was kind of down for one of the right side beside the west stand and quite low down, so I didn't get the best view, and I'd been drinking. So
I thought in the context of missing Jadon Richardson, missing Alex Gogic and Robinson in the stand, and the fact that they've got a semi-final this weekend, and then there's been a wee bit of a struggle. Thought there's a lot to like about St Mirren's performance. Overall, I thought more of the bigger issue is that they didn't really create that much from open play, but they were such a threat from set pieces. We've seen that with the first goal. We've seen both goals and the disallowed goal. Fowler had to make a couple of cracking saves, and they were a real threat from set pieces. As a collective, really, really solid, and I think they would take heart from that performance. And I Robinson is of the view that they maybe not got the results that their performances have merited, and there's been a big thing about not scoring enough goals, but I do think that they've been creating enough to score goals. They've just lacked that clinical edge. But the two players, it was impressive. Look, they had a solid performance as a collective. Two players that maybe kind of wasn't overly impressed by. Cian Abakis had a really poor certainly first half where he kept on getting caught in possession, and that's where Hearts got a lot of joy from, was that they kind of, when St Mirren tried to build it, the Hearts pounced on it really high up the pitch. They pounced it in the middle of the park, and then they went forward really quickly. And then Connor, is it McMenamin? Yeah, that's McMenamin. Down the right hand side, just not sure of him as a wing back. I don't know if what your viewing of him is. I know, I can understand where it's almost like a
balance. There was no Jadon Richardson, so that was the.
There's two very different players. Like, McMenamin's a bit more technical rather than explosive.
He's more of a player to play in the front three than be a wing back. I think he was there as a case of needs must. They did sign that other right back in the summer. I don't have the team lines in front of me. I've not seen the bench. See if he was on that. But yeah, Bacchus, I've said this before, I think. I'm not entirely sure about that midfield three having lost Caelan Boyd-Munce, and then it's Keanu Bacchus instead in there. I think it maybe lacks a bit of balance now and is a wee bit too workmanlike without the kind of miss Caelan Boyd-Munce's kind of technical abilities and range of passing. and also ability to shoot from distance, which I don't think is really anything back as it's kind of shown in his time in Scottish football, but in both instances. So yeah, I'm not sure about the balance they've got there. That's something they might want to look at in January. But it's fine enough to get them by for the meantime, though.
But I'm very intrigued to see how the semi-final goes and what the teams have kind of learnt from playing one another. It's going to be two very, very different styles, so very curious to see how that goes. But I think it's in the context of missing a couple of key players, in the context of the run they've been on, and the far more important game is Saturday because of the importance of it and the opportunity that St Mirren have to not only get to a final, but then you look at the state of Celtic and Rangers. It's just a massive, massive game for Motherwell and St Mirren.
Yeah, certainly. And the player I was thinking of was Tormisi Subowali, who did actually come off the bench for the last 5 minutes, but he doesn't draw his quite. I think there's a couple of summer signings they've made, or maybe about 3 or 4, who don't seem to have quite fully won Stephen Robinson's trust yet.
Moving on to, I think you want to do the games in order you put them in the notes.
Yes.
Perfect. Moving on to Celtic Park. Celtic under Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney beat Falkirk 4-0. It is the biggest win of the Celtic's biggest win of the league season and the joint biggest win overall. Kenny got a couple of goals in the...
Well, before we get to Jojo Kenny, we done that special podcast earlier this week for the YouTube, and it was available on our Patreon lowest tier, where you thought that the players wouldn't respond to Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney coming in, and yet they seemed like they had a bit more verve about them in this game. Do you regret that scepticism at all?
No, my view was more of like a longer term, sorry.
No, well, you did say that the players would like be okay, right? Let's start playing for this guy. I think they were just sick of Brendan Rodgers, so I think anybody maybe coming in and a fresh voice and somebody who was seemingly working his ticket for several weeks.
Yeah,
I think they were maybe just happy enough with that.
There's a very good chance that I am wrong. I am indeed wrong, but I would want to see more than just a victory against Falkirk, who I think are probably the ideal opposition for Celtic to play after what they've gone through.
That's probably shy. That's probably fair as well. It is probably because Falkirk did not go in and park the bus. And I'll get to actually a kind of curiosity with their team in general soon enough. But yeah, Celtic, Jojo Kenny, having struggled against Hearts, like really struggled against Hearts, he had a much better performance, it's fair to say.
And Celtic seemed to play after all the chat of Hearts playing long balls and Brendan Rodgers' comments about DNA. Celtic under Martin O'Neill did seem to try to play quicker and get forward quicker. And that probably helped someone like Kenny rather than having him involved in build up, because that was a big issue at Tynecastle. Was like when you had to have him be that focal point. It's not really that player.
Yeah, and I wonder if it helped Nygren as well, who has been big this season in general in terms of Celtic, and has been a kind of somebody that's provided a bit of zest in a midfield that's really kind of lacked it, and he's kind of come up with some kind of decent moments already in terms of his threat in the final third, but he obviously had a good game in this, and I wonder if he kind of suits that a bit more in a team that's a wee bit more, or I don't want to say a wee bit more kind of direct, because that's probably overplaying it, but a team that's maybe less all about possession and a little less side to side is maybe the best for him. And yeah, you're right about that, Kenny. He did have that nice wee flick round the corner, but what he really struggled with at Tynecastle, because there was a couple of times early on where he did look a little dangerous in behind when Celtic did go long, but otherwise when he was have to be involved in the build up, he did struggle. But if you're just kind of playing balls in behind, he's obviously quite elusive. That's what his game's about. He's somebody that likes to play on the shoulder, and he certainly had a good game and was a wee bit unfortunate not to get a hat-trick as well.
Is there a lot to read into this game for Celtic? Beyond like just an instant reaction to everything that's went on. I was listening to Martin O'Neill and always the fear that whether he was right to go into Celtic, just put it out, in the right stage of his life to go back into Celtic. But listening to him after speaking to, it was Martin Dowden, he himself, I think, he sounded reinvigorated by being in it, and he's only been in it for like 24, 40 hours or whatever it was.
Yeah, and I can imagine he's really kind of happy to be back there and to do what he can in the meantime while Celtic look for their next appointment. And he is quite, like I said this the other day, like he is quite he's somebody with a bit of gravitas. He's quite infectious as well. I mean, he rubs people the wrong way. If you're not a Celtic fan, you don't like Martin O'Neill, probably, in all likelihood. He certainly used to rub me the wrong way back in the day when he was Celtic manager, and I was just, before I got involved in any professional way in talking about football, and I was just a wee fanny. I was not a fan of his character, but I can really envision the fact that him going into the dressing room and talking to the players, that does kind of give them a lift. And he's done a lot in the game as well, so there's got to be a respect there. But I thought, like, looking at the lineup, I thought it was interesting kind of the changes he made. I don't know how much to read into them after one game, but Ralston and Forrest coming back in. O'Neill is somebody that obviously is a keen observer of Celtic, you know, having managed them, I think supported them as well, that he's obviously watching a lot of games, keeping a close eye on them. So it's kind of like, right, let's go back to, let's simplify things a wee bit in terms of like, let's bring in a guy, he's like Forrest, yeah, he's old, but I know what I get from him. Ralston, yeah, not the best footballer in the world, but I know what I'm going to get from him. And the main change that just made sense and they should have done against Hearts, play Austin Trusty at right centre-back. See, there's something in football that really annoys me.
You can play two right-footed centre-backs when they've got two left-footed.
Yes, exactly. What the fuck is that about? Nobody ever says anything when it's two right-footed centre-halves.
They're not to be trusted.
But when it's two left-footed, everybody goes on about, you can't play them together. What the fuck's the difference?
But so there was quite a few interesting elements in that. I'm trying to think. Taneke went across. Did he go across to the right for a wee bit when Rodgers said that he doesn't play there? I think maybe Martin O'Neill shifted him across for a small bit, but it was more the one for me was Sirachi coming in at left back for Kieran Tierney, and he impressed more so than Kieran Tierney has impressed. I thought Tierney was miles off against Hearts, and I think there was a realisation from Celtic that they needed to bring in a left back to compete with Kieran Tierney after some of the guys they signed from Japan clearly weren't going to cut it, and they've managed to find or unearth Sirachi, who they've brought in, and seems to be someone of promise.
The Tierney, yeah, I'm not seeing much of Sirachi, so I can't really speak much about him. However, Tierney, for what I've seen of him so far, he's not been anywhere near the kind of worst problem at Celtic this season. He's been fairly solid. He's been one of their better performers in a few games, and he's also stayed fit. However, it's very clear he's not the same player he was anymore.
He's not that powerful machine.
Yeah, he's lost a bit of something, and it's totally due to the injuries, and it's a real shame. Because this should not be happening to him at this stage of his career, but it's obviously just built up. Who knows? You've seen sometimes with players when you thought they were done after they've had a few injuries, they suddenly find something, they come back with like an added spark. I wouldn't be completely writing off yet, but so far, it's almost like the worst case scenario for this deal. So we don't know exactly what Tierney's on, but we imagine it's a lot of money for him to go back to Celtic. And there's been talk that it's not like a full 5-year guaranteed deal. It's got certain caveats in it if he gets injured, basically. However, it's kind of the worst. It's the worst thing so far, in that you're thinking, Christ, if this is what he looks like now, imagine what he's going to look like in 5 years, still being paid as one of the highest paid players in the team in all likelihood. And also, he's not getting injured anymore, so we can't even cut him loose. Before we
move on to Falkirk, I should mention, when he's talking about Martin O'Neill and his kind of personality, I would urge anyone who's never seen it, the clip, him speaking to Patrick Vieira and Fabio Cannavaro just about, I think, their success in their respective careers. Fowler talks about Falkirk and their lineup. Oh yeah, so I thought it was a bit weird. So I'll give a caveat at the end, but it was a bit. So first of all, they're like defensively, they're on a bit of a hiding to nothing. They've got loads of injuries. Connor Allen played again. They had Lisa, who is kind of, I think, supposed to be normally a centre half, although he has played other games at left back and done not too bad.
but it's a fairly patchwork back four. But I thought it was also a bit strange in terms of the rest of the team. So you're going away to Celtic, then surely you would play Henry Cartwright, who, and I know he loves the Spence Tater axis, and even though I think they might be better with Cartwright as opposed to probably Spencer, maybe. But Falkirk fans would maybe disagree, they've seen more of them, but I think Cartwright's been their most kind of consistently impressive centre midfielder this season, but obviously he's got a bit of loyalty to the guys that got them here. But he's somebody with a bit more dig about him, a bit more kind of presence, a bit somebody that's kind of, somebody that for a game away at Celtic Park could maybe do a bit more of the dirty work for you. So I'm surprised he didn't play. I was also really surprised that Ethan Ross came back to start. Ethan Ross hasn't played since the 9th of August. And then you're throwing him back in away at Celtic Park. Not surprised at all he only lasted to half time. And then in the year of our Lord, 2025, Scott Arfield at Celtic Park, starting the game, playing the full 90 on the right of midfield. I was like, really? We're going with that as well? And even like up front, where they had Samuel Onyegu... Sorry, my pronunciation's always terrible as everybody listens to this podcast knows. Ogunsue? There we go. Samuel Ogunsue started up front as well. And I kind of thought, well, I can see the thinking in that. And that he'll have a bit more pace in behind than Ross McKeever or certainly Brian Graham. But as I mentioned, they didn't go and sit in. They didn't go and like necessarily look to hit on the counter. Obviously, they've got that ability to do so. They're happy to hit on the counter against anybody. But they're a team that like to kind of build the play up. And I thought Ross McKeever against a Celtic backline that Scales won't be in particularly great confidence and Trusty's just coming in. McKeever's a handful and he's good at keeping the ball up the park. And I thought that would have made more sense as well. So I thought it was a strange lineup. However, as I said, I will caveat it, and the caveat is McGlynn, especially with the state of the back line, might have just went, do you know what, this is unlikely to happen, so I'm going to change things up, and you'll see a very different team on Saturday when they play Kilmarnock.
I am reticent to use the term they won't get judged by games against Celtic, because I think that's all the nonsense, because you get judged against every single team that you play in the Scottish Premiership. But I think they're in a good position, and that's something that go back to our preview podcast, and Tony and I were very sceptical about Falkirk and how they would do this season, and my prediction about them just wowing everyone, and John McGlynn getting August Manager of the Month, and then them not winning in a game between September and probably March. But they've adapted well despite some of the issues they've had, especially with the balance of their team, some of the defensive situations they've got. I think if you're to say that we're going to get 12 points after 10 games, I think a pretty solid return.
Oh yeah, definitely. And they've kind of belied what we said about at the start of the season. We might have actually thought they would have 12 points from 10 games, and we would have thought they got like 9 of those points in August.
Yeah.
And they actually struggled out of the blocks and have since adapted to the Premiership. So fair play to them.
Absolutely. See how long it lasts. But there's especially one Falkirk fan I replied on Twitter, being smug when they had a terrible result, and I'm waiting for him to reply to me and tell me to shut my bus, which he would be more than fair to do. We'll move to Fir Park, where Motherwell beat Dundee United 2-0. Let's start with Dundee United, Fowler. And I remember, who was I? I can't remember speaking. I think it was after the Hearts game, and you kind of consider the way that Motherwell played at Hearts, and you think sometimes the best thing to do for this Motherwell team is maybe sit off them and sit in a low block. Now, you can't do that as a Hearts side against Motherwell at Tynecastle, but that's what Jim Goodwin did with United when they went to Fir Park.
Yeah, not a popular choice. You're saying that, maybe that is the best way to play against Motherwell, in which to kind of take away what they like to do.
But you still need to engage with them.
Yeah, you still need to engage with them, and they were just far too passive in this game. I think some of the kind of advanced stats really kind of showed that. So I looked at I think it was maybe FotMob stats, the most duels contested by any single player. The top 3 were all Motherwell players, Slattery, McGinn and Said. And Said actually came off the bench for like the last half an hour, so that's very impressive. And they had 5 of the top 7. So they were certainly the team that were kind of engaging more defensively. Motherwell, rather than Dundee United. And also, crucially as well, Paul McGinn won 80% of his aerial battles. And they've got that Nicolaj Moller up top, who's a big guy. So that was obviously a huge part in the game. But yeah, United, that must have been maybe a kind of a case of overthinking it from Goodwin and maybe looking at Motherwell and looking at what you said in order to nullify those rotations and those passing triangles and how they build their attack. Then to sit deep and then they can't have the space in which to do that. But as you said, Motherwell have also shown that they're very susceptible when you get at them this season. And we've praised them a lot this season. They are the new hipster darlings of the Scottish top flight. But they've still got a goalkeeper who's a bit of a bomb scare. Defensively, they're still a bit suspect, especially I think in the middle of the park in terms of protecting that defence. And even though they get in behind quite a lot and they manage to get into good positions, they've not shown themselves particularly adept at finishing those chances if you're talking about Stamatolopoulos, or even really having the composure to pick out the right option, which is something I think they've struggled with quite a lot this season. So I don't think, even though they got a victory at the weekend, I don't think it was necessarily a team that you should have went in any sort of, fear's probably too strong a word, but like in awe of it all, and saying like, we must do this to stop them. Yeah, I think too much respect was played. I think United should have played their own game and also not playing, like, Camara's dropped out before. And I don't think he's, like, I'm a big fan of the guy. I don't think he should necessarily be exempt from being taken out of the team from time to time. But I think it's now a bit weird at the stage that he's the one that seems to be getting dropped and Savelj isn't. Like, I don't think necessarily he should be getting dropped either. I'm not saying that that's a huge problem with the team. But if you're looking to mix up, there always seems to be Camara that comes out and not Savelj. Is that a loyalty thing? Like, is that going too much of the performances of the last season? I don't really know. But that's just certainly something interesting to what Goodwin has been doing of late. And I know United fans have been kind of more, as time has gone on, kind of asking for Savelj to be taken out of the team for a period. But bringing in Eskison, I thought was a bit strange. For their game plan, it was quite a weird setup in general because I had like 4 quite attacking players at the front of the park, and they switched as well to 4 at the back. It just didn't work. Let's cut through all the rabble. It just didn't work.
United are a really weird team. To kind of get your handle on and or to kind of get a handle on, but at the same time it makes sense considering the number of changes have been made this season. And I don't know if it's still a case of things are still trying to work themselves out, or Jim Goodwin's still trying to work things out, or it leads to a case of overthinking things, which can happen with a manager when he's got a lot of choice or there's been a lot of change. On Motherwell, it has been a really, really big week for them, getting back-to-back wins, going in, not only just going in the semi-final, but just around the feeling that was building, where you talked about them like the media, the hipster darlings, media darlings, where you're just wondering if they were going to look great but lacking substance. And because it's such a reactionary business we're in, and it's like you're almost like, is it ever going to happen for Motherwell? They're just going to be this team that plays nice football but actually don't deliver, whereas they've delivered 2 wins, and I think that kind of eases the pressures and also probably builds confidence within the Motherwell squad and builds confidence in the manager. Like, yes, we are on the right we're on the right line, even if there's still areas to improve.
Yeah, and I think there's still, you can still see that kind of weak underbelly in this game as well. When Lucas Stevenson should have equalised for United. Like, he's unlucky in terms of hitting the post, but he should just finish it. And it's kind of one of those goals that you see Motherwell conceding a lot, where there's just like so much space at the back for the opponents, and something you maybe shouldn't be, or maybe something you don't expect in a game when you're leading 1-0. And that was at the start of the second period, where they've kind of toiled, certainly the Hearts game comes to mind, and there's maybe other instances, but start of second halves is kind of periods where they've not quite managed to replicate what they've shown in first periods, and that's sometimes in matches where they've kind of covered straight a bit, and it always happened in this one. And had Stevenson scored at a period when Motherwell started to look a wee bit ropey, what would have happened for that point. But to be fair to them, they didn't let that moment kind of get to them too much mentally, and instead they screwed the nut, went down the other end, and Elliot Watt scored a terrific goal.
Very, very pleasing goal on the eye with the yes. strike and the way it hit, where it hit the back of the net, and we'll come on to talk about a very good strike, another very good strike soon. But just wanted to finish up by asking you about, is there a specific player in the Motherwell side that you have either been really impressed with or just been really surprised by?
Tawanda Maswanisi, maybe. We were quite big on him in the podcast last year, but I didn't quite see it. Thought he struggled a little bit for composure, in particular in the final third. Thought, yeah, he's just another one of these guys. It's like, he's got a bit of pace about him. He can scare opposing defences, but at the end of the day, does he really come up in the big moments? Not really. This season he certainly has. He's got 9 goals in 16 games. 4 of those were against Diddy teams in the League Cup, but 5 goals in the league so far this season. That's a good return. And I think while Motherwell in general, as I said, I've still lacked that bit of composure, and he is part of it. I think he has improved that side of his game. And he's certainly looking a lot more rounded now as a player in the Scottish Premiership than I think he did last season. And one final thing just to say about Motherwell in this one, the fact that they were able to rotate a bit and still get the victory. So Longelo didn't start, Stamatolopoulos didn't start, Saeed didn't start, Just didn't play at all. That bodes well for Saturday against St Mirren, who, while Gogic and Richardson didn't play and will be fresh, they weren't able to rotate things as much ahead of a game that could end up lasting 120 minutes.
Move on to Easter Road, where Hibs lost 1-0 to Rangers. Who do you want to start with here, Rangers or Hibs? I think go Rangers, because I think they've been really interesting. They have changed to a 3-4-3, and I think Wednesday was really noticeable in the improvement that they've made defensively. Well, not perfect. It didn't have to be perfect to improve on what was going on before, but I think you can see that Rolls came in and he's at least found a system that suits certain players, or basically gets the best out of certain players, or covers certain players' weaknesses to a greater extent than they were under Russell Martin.
Well, I think what we've seen from him so far, so he was still labelled as somebody that likes to play a style of football that's not too dissimilar to Russell Martin. He likes these teams to get the ball down and pass it. However, he's shown something that Russell Martin never did in his time at Ibrox, which is adaptability. So what's interesting to me is where the motivation for this adaptability is coming from. Is he... So, yeah, in this game he goes to a 3 at the back, but the played wasn't just necessarily the setup rather than how they played that I thought kind of stood out in terms of the fact they played quite conservatively. They got in front, were kind of happy to hold on to it. They kind of indulged in the dark arts a little bit, some kind of fouls to slow the game down, just in general kind of taking their time over things. Not what you expect from Rangers going to anywhere in Scottish football, other than you can argue Celtic, where the game plan, and it's the same for both of the old firm, the game plan is to blitz the opponent early on, get the job done. And so when you go 1-0 up early at Easter Road, absolutely get at them and try and bury them and make the game over before half time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen Rangers do that with very good Hibs teams at Easter Road in the past, and you would say in general there's no reason why they should not do it to this Hibs team, with all due respect to what I think is a good Hibs squad. But I wonder why he's not done that, and I think it's one of 2 reasons. One, it's halfway through a season, and if he's wanting to get the players to play to his system, he needs time that he's not got at this point. So he's saying, right, this is a game plan that's just going to get us results, so let's just do that and let's build from there. Or, because I've certainly said this, I don't think it's a good Rangers squad. And I do agree with Ewan's point that I think it might be their weakest squad since their first season back in the Premiership, which would make it worse than the squad of the Kashinya/Murty season. And that sounds a bit wild, but you think about that team on Morelos, Candeas, Rajak, Tavernier, like nearly 10 years younger. So I think that still might be the case, but certain players are starting to play a bit better now under him. And the answer to that question will be borne out in the next month to 6 weeks, and then we'll get a real handle whether the squad was as bad as it looked under Russell Martin and had wasted so much money in the summer on a lot of crap, or they were just playing so poorly because they were playing for a manager who was just in completely the wrong movie.
Could it be both, though, with what you said, the two reasons?
Could be a bit of both, yeah. Could be a bit of both.
Where Rose came in, he's just going, right, this is a club where you need to get results, and he's understood that best way to get results is clean up the defensive side. That's one area that if you get that sorted, there's going to be a natural big improvement because of how bad they were before. And then secondly, just like he realises that, this team aren't very good, so let's try and be hard to beat first of all, and then just try and get to the next transfer window and then try and evolve the squad. Early signs, I think that's a really positive. I think it's a really positive early sign for the manager that he's gone in there and he's kind of recognised that, made some key changes, bought into the fans have bought into him. John Stewart, I think, suits being in the middle of those, or having two defenders beside him rather than one bomb scare, and then Magoma as well, protection behind him, which is positive. Moving on to before we move on to Hibs, Danilo's goal. Very good.
Very nice. I'm glad his dad liked it as well.
Yeah, that was interesting to see. But watching him and watching the goal, like every time I watch it, I think he's opening his body and putting it in the bottom left-hand corner. It just looks like that's the only way he can do it, and then wrapping his foot around it, really, really good. Hibs, if I was a Hibs fan, I wouldn't be too concerned about the defeat, just considering they made some good chances. They had a penalty saved, but still look at it and think, does that team need a bit more? Does David Gray need to be more flexible?
Yeah, I think so. So I think it's maybe a bit of time, because they do have some really good options off the wing that are having to kind of play as almost as forwards. Now, I'm saying Boyle at this stage of his career is maybe a centre forward, but I can still imagine him doing a really good job on the right of a front three. And then you've got Yuan as well, who's back and can play on the left. You've got Hoylett. Probably Nicky Cadden could obviously play there as well. Doesn't have to necessarily play as a wing back. But if he wants to stay with the 3-5-2, I think there's something key that he maybe needs to do as well, which is to drop Kieran Bowie. Because Kieran Bowie has been rubbish.
Yeah.
Pretty much ever since everybody, including myself, wanted him to get a game for Scotland, he's just not looked good at all, and he doesn't look like he's enjoying himself. I think it's now at the stage where he needs to be taken out of the team for his own good. And I'm seeing Hibs fans, and Tony even said this as well, like the problem is they don't have a backup. Like they didn't sign Dykes, so apparently they're still looking to try and bring him in January. But because of that, there's no backup to Bowie, and he has to play every game. No, he doesn't. He doesn't at all. Like, Hibs started the last season putting results together in this system when Bowie, I'm pretty sure, was still injured at the time, and even Big Mick Kukarevich might have been injured as well. And what they started to put things together was that they had this formation, and they had two speedsters at the front. They had Ewan and they had Boyle, which they can then obviously replicate this season, not necessarily them two, but they've also got Clegy as well, who does look a terrible miss in this game. I think he didn't know as much about it, couldn't sort his body in time to get in the back of the net, but still should have scored. But he looks a good player. To have him alongside Ewan or alongside Boyle, and to have Josh Campbell playing behind them. Now, Campbell, limited player, but that worked last season, where they almost used him as kind of a false nine.
Yeah.
And when they went long, he was able to win headers, he was able to occupy defenders, and that created space for Johan and Boyle which to work. Why not return to that? Or, as you say, the other option is to change it into a 4-3-3 again, because the kind of width they've got, that 3-5-2, they're struggling a little bit to play it as quickly out to the wings as they did last season. And that's causing issues for Nicky Cadden, because he's now having to rely more on beating people rather than last year when they were getting out to him really quickly. And then a lot of times he was just getting out his feet and putting a ball into the penalty area. And that was such a weapon.
Anything else to say on the two teams?
No, I think I've covered it all.
Obviously Rangers have I think, who have Hibs got this weekend? Have they got
Hibs are playing...
the weekend off?
Oh, no, Hibs are playing. Hibs are playing, hang on a second.
Away at Livingston, of course. They've already beat Livingston a couple of times this season. And so I'd imagine they would get back onto and try. I think bigger, obviously the big game is Sunday for Rangers. And I think we covered it on the Celtic one where whoever comes out of that game having made it to the final, I think will really kind of kick on and it'll give them a massive boost for the rest of the season. Moving on to the final. The fifth and final game from the midweek, Kilmarnock 0, Aberdeen 1. I think this was a huge, not only just a huge result for Aberdeen, but the manner of it was massive for them. The fact that they've got hammered in Athens, were well beaten and deservedly beaten by Hibs, and they've scrapped and fought and battled to get not just a victory, but a clean sheet as well.
Yeah, no, totally. Like, I think it's the most complete performance of the season so far. But I don't mean in terms of complete playing well for 90 minutes and dominating a game, because they didn't. But it showed different aspects of the game that is some of which have been lacking this season. So, first half, changed up the team. Bit of a curveball from Jimmy Tillane. He threw in Dylan Loban, the youngster, young Aberdeen fan at right wing back. He had a very good game, but he also kind of changed it up in the middle of the park as well. He moved Armstrong from playing in the centre to playing in the front three, and obviously that helped with Armstrong scoring the goal with kind of good movement. Obviously, he was on the right mainly, but he kind of drifted in and came through the left and took advantage of some really bad goalkeeping. They seem to blame Robbie Dees for it on Sports Scene. He does stop and maybe shouldn't do, but the keeper is the one that should be coming for that ball that just loops up in the air. Like, especially like that. Because you're not going to be out-jumped. Well, you shouldn't be out-jumped by anybody because you can use your hands. So, like, you should be able to go and reach above somebody jumping with their head. So I don't understand why the keeper making his debut for Kelly didn't come for that. But anyway, Aberdeen were good in the first half. Lazetic was good again up top. He's starting to really look like somebody that as time goes on even more and he manages to settle into both the team and to life in Scottish football in general, that he'll really be he's got the makings of like really being a star in this team. But first half they were very impressive, dominated the game, looked like Aberdeen should do with the players up in their team. Second half wasn't that, but this is the other side to Aberdeen this season. We've talked about how they weren't scoring any goals and they're not functioning as well going forward as they should do. But we haven't talked about as much how underwhelming, how poor they've been defensively at times. And this was a game where in the second period, Kelly put them under a fair amount of pressure. Aberdeen had to defend their box for long periods. And yeah, Kelly did have a couple of chances. They did get away with a couple. But overall, they done well on that side of the game. So they were able to put in a decent performance, but also able to dig in and fight and manage to squeeze out the 3 points in the end. And those are, the latter part, certainly something that you weren't sure about this Aberdeen team in terms of the kind of heart for the fight. And that's maybe, especially early in the season, when we had that kind of snowball effect of things just going from bad to worse. And you were looking at that squad saying, surely guys, you're better than this. That was maybe showing a different side of them that they need to start showing more often.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Mats Noster summed up. He had a couple of really big blocks and just kind of getting his body in front of the ball being really hard to break down. I think what will be key for Aberdeen going forward in Tillane is trying to find the right balance in midfield, and whether it's a midfield 2, whether it's a midfield 3. And I think it was loved at the start of the season by Aberdeen fans. Like Polvara's kind of big in that. I think they've got a lot of talent. I think they have got a lot of talent. They've got a lot of options, but I don't think they've got necessarily the right blend of options that really help. There's been an issue, like obviously with Shinnie and Nielsen, and I do think that Polvara's probably could be seen as kind of the glue amongst that. So yeah, that'll be interesting to see how Aberdeen and Tillane go from there. But when you actually kind of break it down, I know they've had an interesting time off late, but winning 3 of the last 4 league games as I know the last two games prior to a Kelly game been a bit of a disaster, but winning 3 of the last 4 is at least signs of a wee bit of progress. As for Kelly, another disappointing evening. What did you see in them? What did they try to do to get back to winning ways?
Interesting that Stuart Kettlewell went with the kind of 3-6-1/4-5-1. That's a system he used a bit more at Motherwell. What did I say? 6-4-1.
You said so. You said 3-6-1/4-5-1.
Fucking hell. Okay, 3-6-1/5. 5-4-1. Yeah. Right. Okay. Sorry. Right. Anyway, mathematics for the criminally insane there. So, yeah. We saw that a bit more in Motherwell, and obviously his football Motherwell wasn't quite as respected as it has been so far at Kilmarnock. And that's going to be something to keep an eye on. However, do have my sympathies with Kettlewell.
Oh yeah,
for this game in particular. They are missing a lot of key players.
Yep.
So for this game, they were missing Striek, Mayo, Brandon, Kennedy, and Daniels.
I was going to say half. Well, did I say yeah? So essentially, just under half their team.
Yeah, just under half their team. And even like Marley Watkins is out, Scott Tiffery just came back, so there's another couple of options there which are not either absent or not fully up to speed as well. At the same time though, kind of feels like in the summer they maybe could have and should have, in hindsight, added another kind of creative spark to this team. Because in that second period when they were putting all the pressure on Aberdeen did do well to defend the box for the most part, but Kelly never really asked them any other questions other than that. Didn't really have that type to play that pass or to do something a little bit different. And so they became a bit predictable and a bit one-dimensional. And that's maybe a wee bit of a concern. Well, both that and the injuries are obviously a concern. And also a concern is Marcus Dackers. Started the season, we really liked the look of him. Thought, bloody hell, they've picked this guy from absolute nowhere. He's been really poor of late, and it'll be interesting to see if he is able to bounce back from this, if it's just a rough patch, or whether, and this is kind of what I'm leaning towards at this point in time, whether he started the season so well because defenders have just never seen him before, and he's a kind of almost unique type of player. He's big, but he's fast, and he's got a good touch. But is he great at holding the ball up? Is he great at winning headers? Is he great at scoring goals? All big question marks. Whether now that they are aware of him, they can study him on tape or whatever. Now do they know how to play against him? Now do they know what his weaknesses are? Now do they know how to make sure that he doesn't have much of an impact on the game? Because without him, and so it was kind of him and Daniels that felt like they built their attack round this summer. Mm-hmm. He's not played well. Daniels is out. Where does that leave Kelly? I think they've got some big games coming up because they've got some winnable matches. They're away to Falkirk this weekend, and then they've got Motherwell and Dundee United at home after Celtic. To get them through this rough period where they've got a few players out, I think they need at least a victory of that. Otherwise, you're looking at a team that might end up in a relegation battle, and we didn't think that was going to be the case as recent as a couple of weeks ago.
Absolutely. I mean, you say that might be in a relegation battle. No doubt in 4 games' time, Kelly will be comfortably 4th place.
Probably.
And then 4 weeks.
This season's been wild.
Yeah. And then 4 weeks later, they'll be back in like, they're going to get dragged out of relegation, but we're not sure. That's going to be the whole season from now on. So I hope so. Yeah, absolutely. It makes us look fools trying to predict stuff, but it's certainly fun, and we're used to making ourselves look fools. Anyway, we'll leave it there. Craig, thank you very much. You're away to see Heim tonight. That'll be very, very good. I hope it.
Yes.
Yeah, it'll be Hydro.
Yes, it is. Yeah, thoroughly looking forward to it.
Yeah, that'll be really good. Everyone else, hope you have a lovely weekend and enjoy whichever game you're going to or whichever game you are watching. Please, is this going Patreon or is this going...
No, this is a main show. It's going YouTube and everything.
Perfect. In that case, then check out patreon.com/Terrace Podcast. There is loads of good content going up there, teeming with content. So be sure to check out that. There's a few series that are really, really good to get your teeth stuck into. Anything else you need to add, Fowler, before we get out of here?
No, I think that's everything.
Superb. Well, thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.